Hey, hello! This is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of getting students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials.
Hey, so today we have Scott Hebert, and he is a passionate and dedicated teacher who has taught K-12 physical education as well as grade 7th and 8th sciences for the past 8 years. He's on a mission to rid the stereotype that school is boring and loves to challenge the traditional approaches to education via gamification. He also aims to be innovative in his constantly challenging himself to put new practices into play. He was a recipient of the 2013 Alberta Excellence in Teaching Award and the 2015 Gamification of Education Project of the Year internationally. So Scott, are you prepared to engage?
Absolutely. I'm ready to press start and let's get going.
Let's do this. So Scott, my first question is, what does a regular day with Mr. Hebert look like?
Actually, it's kind of hard for me to answer that, but I guess there's kind of two different days that I do. I have in my classroom, it's a big, giant medieval themed RPG that the kids participate in. And what happens throughout that is we either have tutorial days or questing days. Tutorial days are days that I teach. So the kids come in, I use the software called Pear Deck, which is like this interactive teaching software that mirrors my screens on their devices. Kind of go through some content, and kind of the more exciting day that we have is called questing. And questing is when they meet different characters who need their assistance. They uncover secrets, disarm traps, any kind of game context thing you can think of. That's all webbed into the curriculum. So they might be, buying resources to build furniture so that their camp where they do their work is more comfortable, to fighting a monster on my battle board via trivia, to performing experiments to prove that a fraud is, I guess, lying to them, and things like that. So it's kind of difficult for a typical day, but I guess you could say that we're kind of in one of those kind of areas.
But that's fantastic, and it sounds very exciting. It was a very, very nice description of what your day looks like, especially in your classes. And that's why engagers, that's why we have Scott here, because he is definitely applying gamification and games in his classroom, and we want to learn. We want to learn a lot from you, Mr. Hebert, as he calls himself on the internet. So now we want to shift a bit, Scott, because we want to know what was what we would call your favorite failure, or your favorite time that maybe something that you failed at, and even given in your class and using gamification, which probably led you later to a big success, and to the success that you have today using gamification in your classroom.
Oh, absolutely. There's one that jumps immediately to the top of the list of this. So I've tried all kinds of things in my classroom. The thing that I think, first of all, in education that I love is I love failure in education. I think that too often education promotes perfection. So kids are too afraid to fail. And I'm just all about, you want to try something 100 times. I'm not that teacher that doesn't allow retests or redos. So my favorite was, I actually had a former student a few years ago who was, you could say, labeled by his peers as kind of like not smart and lazy and like these kind of things. And because of all that, gamification really thrived for him, because he was actually not those descriptors. He was actually just bored of traditional education, like many kids are. So he came up to me one day and he said, I have this idea for the game. He goes, I want to put in a jail. And I said, well, why would you want to put a jail in the classroom? And he goes, for kids who don't appreciate what we're doing in here, you should be able to put them in this jail in the back of the classroom, which essentially was this it was awesome. There was this cubicle that he ended up making out of cardboard, but he cut little bars in it and stuff. And he goes, I want that to be real school. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, put the textbook and the notes and the boring stuff in there. And if a kid is misbehaving, or a kid is not appreciative of what you're doing here, put them in that cubicle and show them what it could be. And I was like, you know what? For for the expectations that people have of you of education, I said, I'll honor that and let's give it a try. So he built the jail. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Stanford experiment.
Yeah.
So that's
please
pretty much
explain. Maybe somebody is not completely familiar.
Oh, sure.
With that.
So essentially, the Stanford experiment, for those who are unfamiliar, is they just took regular people and they put them in a jail, and they made half of these people jail guards and half of them inmates, and they watched essentially the psychology behind what happened and how they interacted with each other and how they assumed the roles that they were given, and it was pretty interesting, like how these people started treating each other based on the roles that they were given and things like that. So that's exactly what happened. Students applied, so I have jobs in my classroom, and one of the jobs then became the jail guard. So one of the students applied, or several of the students applied for the jail guard, and we had the interview process, and I picked one per class. That time I taught 4 different grade 8 science classes. So I had 100 gamified students going on, and the power that the kids exerted through this jail guard is you could see that anything that carried over from recess or outside school was brought into the classroom, and kids really, really had a hard time checking their emotions. So kids started to pick on each other and were putting each other in jail for no reason. It became very controversial, and kids were getting kicked out and treated. So we actually had to have this huge debrief. And the really interesting part behind it was the kids were like, how do you at your job check your ego? Like, if you don't like someone, how do you not bring that into your teaching and things like that? And it was really cool, all of the growth that came out of the failure of trying to have the student-run jail in the classroom.
Wow, that sounds like a fantastic experience. And the good thing is that unlike the the experiment with the jail, nobody got hurt. there were
Exactly.
no psychological consequences. So it sounds like a very, very powerful learning experience for your kids. Did you ever use the jail experience again?
No, I haven't, because we haven't been able. So kids have tried, like we've discussed, but we can't come up with a way that it becomes a neutral entity in the classroom. So essentially what it becomes again is this like area that you go to if you misbehave. And I'm not big on like the misbehaving in class. I think that based on the way that I teach, kids have days where they'll like blow off steam. So they might have 14 days out of the on average 28 they have in the classroom, or 25 of the classroom of the month of questing, and there's no set time. So they walk in and they can work on whatever one that they want. So sometimes certain kids will just goof around because they had, a stressful math class or social class before that. And I allow kids to do that from like a mental health perspective. So a lot of the quote unquote bad behaviors of education are seen in my classroom because it's a free flowing, really fluid and dynamic space. So we couldn't find a logical way in which to bring that jail in to fit the dynamic of the room without it being kind of this like power trip for kids.
Yeah, interesting. That's very interesting. Just a quick follow up on that, because from what you're saying, it sounds like you're the teacher who's doing the gamification thing in your school. Is that the way it's going right now?
Yes. Absolutely.
So you're the pioneer. It sounds great. Scott, I would like to shift now a bit and like to know, and we'd like to know, what's the biggest challenge that you've faced? Perhaps, of course, we would be amazed if it was in your classroom, and we'd love it. But what's the biggest challenge that you've faced and solved using gamification?
Well, I always kind of refer to it as this. I think that even when I do presentations and when I did my TED Talk and everything about this subject, I really think that there's an engagement crisis in education. We throw technology at kids and we expect them to like learning and love learning, and then you dust off the textbook that they're using and it was printed 15, 20 years ago. And we wonder as teachers, and we wonder as a community, well, why are kids not liking school? Oh, they're bored and they're disengaged, and we essentially, for lack of a better term, we poop all over kids and we're mad at them all the time. But when you really look at it, they're bored. Like, plain and simple, they're bored and they're disengaged. And I kind of really realized this. I'll try to keep this short because it's kind of a long story, but essentially I started as an elementary phys ed teacher. And I think that every teacher, I say this all the time, should experience a year of elementary education, because kids in kindergarten and grade 1 do not hate school. They adore school. They think it's the coolest thing in the world. Like, my daughter is 4 and my son is 3. And when they can't go to their preschool, like, they're upset. Like, they just absolutely love it. And you see this passion and this expectation of what education is, because it's based on play and fun and centers and discovery learning and collaboration and all the good things. As you get older in school, those things are weeded out for more pure, quote unquote, academics.
Sorry to interrupt you, Scott. Because I recently precisely read an article saying that they're getting big right now on introducing back play and those things, but in like the lower grades, the younger ones. So maybe that's the experience that you're having and your kids. But I'm not sure everybody's having that experience. Regretfully, I mean that play is certainly something that every single research is pointing to. That's the best way for kids to learn. So never forget about that. About that experience. I mean, what Scott is saying right now, and sorry again to interrupt, but it's very, very powerful. And not only that they're very engaged and they're very happy to go to school, but I'm sure it also has consequences on how they learn and how much they learn and what their capacity to learn through those classes. So please continue, Scott.
No, and that's absolutely true. There's a book I read early in my career, really short, easy read. The author escapes me, but it's called Even Bad Guys Have Birthdays. It was written by a kindergarten teacher who had experience in kindergarten, I think, for 20 plus years. And it explains all of the dynamics of learning that she witnesses in her kids in the ages of kindergarten. So she'll like read a book and then she'll watch the kids later in stations interact that book, but on a deeper level, and make these, connections between bad guys and good guys, and helping and hurting people and these kinds of things. So education then pries that away. You go from like big table groups and stuff to quiet rows and textbook and worksheet after worksheet. So we had a kind of a family medical emergency that caused me to move. So we ended up moving to a different community, and I was hired from the kindergarten age to grade 8, which a lot of people view as one of the more difficult years to teach because of raging hormones and kids finding themselves and discovery of cell phones and social media and all these things. So I got to this grade 8 science program, and the kids just could care less. I was running around excited about science and all these different kinds of things. And it didn't seem to matter what I did, how I said it, how I did it. The kids just didn't care. And the kids that cared didn't care about science. They cared about getting a good grade because they were worried about their parents' reaction. And I said, do I really want to add to this mentality of education? Or I said, can I really change it? So because it was new, I did the first year in kind of a traditional approach and made it as engaging as I could. But once I knew the curriculum, I took the approach of gamification, starting in 2018. Yeah, so I started planning in 2014 and implemented in 2015. And I was one of the first people that I know of to do what I did. So I really wanted to crack the engagement crisis that I really viewed, and it's been absolutely transformational. I've seen grades go up an average of 10 to 15%. I've had extreme cases where kids failed science in grade 7 in the 40s and have passed my program in the 90s the following year. I get emails and tweets and messages from parents about, like, I don't know anything that my kid does at school except your class. We have to rearrange doctor's appointments, dentist appointments so they don't miss science. The whole notion that school is boring to these kids was what I wanted to solve. And by making it play-based and experiential and trial and error and encouraging risk-taking and all of these words that we toss around in education, like grit and failure and perseverance, but we never actually do anything with it. So we're always like, oh, kids need to be demonstrate more grit and more determination and more this and more that. But okay, well, how are you doing it in your classroom? Well, I'm not sure. So I wanted to make sure that the gamification wasn't a buzzword in my class. It was a thing. And
so there, I wanted to make you a quick question, because
yeah, sure.
I'm sure that the kids are super engaged, and I actually should know the answer to the question, but I want to make sure that that the audience also gets this answer, because you're a guy who's actually experienced it day to day in your classroom. And the question is quite simple. Of course they're engaged, but are they actually learning as well?
Yeah, absolutely they are. And that was one of the things that a lot of people question me about is, it's fun in games, and that, the kids are doing all this and creating all these things, but are they really retaining it? And the answer, quite simply, is yes.
Yes, period.
because they're so involved, and like, there are certain classes where I don't even speak to the kids. They come in, they go right to their tasks, and they want nothing to do with me. So I've shifted from teacher to guide, essentially.
Fantastic.
And the incredible part about it is that, while it's not a silver bullet, you're always going to have kids whose home life or whatever is so upside down that school is just the last priority, no matter how engaging you make it. So, there's been challenges with students periodically here and there, but I would say probably 99% of kids that have gone through this program, which number-wise right now is about 420, I would guess, are just like, they go to next levels, and they're like, oh, we miss the way this is. We miss this type of learning. We miss this type of teaching. Because they're like, we remember it because we did it and we were engaged in it. We weren't just told.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
I think that's the biggest thing.
Absolutely. Scott, and this relates very much to the next question. I was going to ask you about whether you think or not that you're doing is actually scalable to other schools, to other teachers, etc. So the question is that I normally do is, what's the process that you follow to apply this gamification in your class? And I would like to mix it as well with whether or not you think this is something that somebody else can do that is not Mr. Hebert.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I've done presentations all over the province, or I guess my province of Alberta in Canada, and I've been invited now to do some keynotes. I'll be in Atlanta in July and things like that. So there's an interesting thing about the way a lot of education works is when you work on education time, you have to watch what you do. So I would come home, and in the middle of the night, I would be planning things and creating game cards and stuff. And eventually people started to say, like, well, how do we do this? And, I had these emails back and forth, and it got really stressful because I just couldn't keep up. And ultimately what happened, I guess, when you talk about scalability in a nutshell, is I presented at a huge conference that we have here. It's just a teaching convention, 5,000 teachers or something. And I presented in just one of their breakout sessions, and the newspaper here came out, and their education writer came and approached me after and was like, I want to come do a story about your classroom. So it made the front page of the Edmonton Journal, which is a newspaper distributed to hundreds of thousands of people. So when it made that front page, it then made Reddit. Someone shared it on Reddit, and it made the front page of Uplifting News on Reddit, and then went viral. So I was getting emails from people all over the world saying, how do we do this? So last March, I went nutso and I wrote a book. So I did 3 nights of like 9 straight hours fueled by coffee and energy drinks while my kids went to bed. And I wrote a book called Press Start to Begin. And it is a complete guide about how to do what I do. Full of templates, full of exemplars, full of things you can fill out. But I didn't want to just do a book. I wanted to do something that was immersive to the readers. So it's actually a choose your own adventure, and it's gamified itself. You follow the story of a teacher who discovers this secret letter, and you go to this location and you meet a guy named Master Hebes, who's me, because that's actually what the kids named me in the game, which was kind of neat. So I'm Master Hebes, and then you go through this series of training with him. And there's like a Twitter game built into it. There's interactive pieces. There's examples of everything that I do. There's photocopy things you can do if you're in education, templates, like I said. So in essence, if I could give anyone advice about how to do this, there's kind of just a couple simple steps. Number one is, what are you passionate about? Because most people, when they see what someone's doing, they want to replicate what they did. So people who have done what I do, they do the medieval theme like I did. But I grew up playing a game called Diablo, which was this click-based RPG. You killed skeletons, pick up their armor, gold, and I loved it. So it reminded me so much of my childhood that I tried to replicate the content of that into my science class. And because I know that topic inside and out, it was easy for me to make all these connections back and forth. I knew what to create. I knew how to create missions. I knew the wording. I knew the language. So it was simple. A lot of people then start medieval and they're like, well, what did you do this? What did you do this? And I said, well, what do you actually know? And like, oh, I'm super passionate about music. I'm super passionate about archaeology, whatever it was. And I said, then that should be the theme of your game. So first thing is, what do you know a lot about, and what could you connect to your curriculum? The second thing is, don't worry about the content forcing things content-wise and curriculum into the theme. Just make it flow naturally. So when you do this kind of flow, think about writing a movie script. So typical work is a worksheet, or read this and answer this question. So I said, well, instead of a book, why don't you meet people? So they meet people, and the people are like, oh my God, we need your help because here's the situation. And then they actually use their science skills to solve the problems or help out these people, or like I said, things like that. And that becomes really immersive because it's like watching a movie or reading a book. You actually begin to care about these people. Because what the kids don't know is annually I have like ethical ties. So if you ignore the kid who's crying in the field and choose not to do that mission, the bad guys might recruit him later, and you might have an additional task to do later in the year. He might track you down and say, you ignored me, now I'm getting my revenge, and you have to do another trivia-based thing from months ago. So once you have a theme and you have a flow, what you just start doing is start connecting your curriculum and your content to your theme. So I just always say do almost like a matching. What do you do in your classroom normally? Okay, I have tests, I have worksheets, I have this and that, and then you make a column on the left. And you say, well, what are the key things about the theme I want to choose? So for mine, medieval, I was like, well, you have monsters, battle, armor, weapons, and then I just started connecting what I do to what I wanted to do. Just like a simple matching. So I was like, okay, well, battles, I do tests. Well, that we can have the monster be what you're battling. Instead of points, it becomes health. So every time you get a question right, you swing your weapon at the monster, and if you're right, he loses health. If you defeat him, he drops loot. So I just started going through this procedure, and I just started linking things together. And then the third thing is, like, I just started salvaging garbage from all over the place. I'm not even shy to admit it. I went in dumpsters and I found broken things and I refurbished them, because we don't really have a lot of money for this. Like, there's no budget for this. Okay. And I'm not rich by any sense of the imagination. So I would go to construction sites and I'm like, hey guys, can I have this scrap wood? Can I have this scrap metal? Can I borrow this? Can I have this? I went on buy and sell groups. I went on tabletop gaming sites and in the local community, and I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And they were like, this is so cool, we'll give you this, these are extra pieces. And I just turned my classroom into a medieval lair. Wow. So I just wanted to create that environment that was immersive. So if anyone wants to do this, you don't have to start as big as I did. I would always say, even like I say in my book, start really, really small. I helped a kindergarten teacher scale down what I did by I said, walk into your classroom and what is one thing your kids know? And she's like, oh, they know this coffee mug. I always drink from it. And I always talk about it as a gift. And I said, perfect. That goes missing on Monday. And she's like, what? And I'm like, okay. So Monday, I'm like, you just got to act, oh, have you guys seen my mug? And she started acting and playing it up. And the kids now, all of a sudden, these 4 and 5-year-old kids were just like, oh my God, where's our teacher's mug? This is unbelievable. We've got to find it. So then she started putting clues out that related to the content. So all of a sudden the kids came back from recess, and in the reading circle carpet area, there was an envelope, with the cutout letters from the newspaper. That was a clue to where it was, but it tied to the content. So she picked a word from her word wall, and that was the emphasis of the lesson, to decipher what do you think that word means in this clue. And there were numbers they had to add together that led to room codes, and eventually the kids solved it just by flowing basically through curriculum with no worry at all.
Wow, and that's fantastic.
and we designed it so that it was the principal, and the principal was in on it, and they stormed the office one day, and the principal was drinking from the mug, and the kids were so proud of themselves that they solved it. And so it doesn't have to be a huge scale like I did. Like, I would advise people not to start the way I did, because there was a huge learning curve for me. So if you start small, get the kids engaged, and then to have discussions with them, hey, what if we did this longer? What are certain things that you would want? The more you involve kids in the process, the more that they'll just be on it hook, line, and sinker.
That's fantastic, Mr. Scott Hebert. So I want to, first of all, we're arriving to the second part of the interview, and this is the part of quick answers. But before actually getting into that, I would like to give a shout out to your kids. We've been listening to them for a while, so I wanted to acknowledge that they're around and say you can say hello from on the behalf of the engagers over here. And now get into the first question, which is if there's any best practice that you could name for using gamification in the classroom. Is there something that you say, well, this is the kind of thing that should be done in a classroom to use gamification?
I don't really think there's a specific one, because all classrooms are different, right? All curriculum is a bit different. All content is a bit different depending on where you're from and all that kind of thing. So I don't think that there's like a best way to do it. I think that you can really morph any common goal or any curricular goal via gamification. Yeah. If you have kids who are reluctant to study, you can definitely have studying that works really, really well for, or gamification processes that works really, really well for people to, I'm just going to shift upstairs really quick, because the kids have just seen my wife, and now they're excited. So this will be a little bit quieter. But anyway, so it's one of those things where, like I said, if you have kids who are reluctant to study, well, if you create a game, so for example, I've taken the Jenga board game and I've turned it into a review game called Tumbling Tower. I actually have a YouTube channel I forgot to mention. If you just search Master Hebes on YouTube, and I have a lot of tutorials about the step-by-step about how to do it that kind of tie really well with the book. So you could use like a review game via gamification to encourage kids to study, or if you've got kids who are really, they're not meeting deadlines, so I guess there's no real best practice. The best practice depends on what the ultimate goal is in your classroom.
I'm just going to push you a little bit on this one. Maybe what a best practice could be. I'm not saying this is the one that you could say, but you could say maybe using a theme could be a best practice, or maybe using a story could be a best practice. Is there something, because of course nothing is going to work exactly the same way for 8th grade classrooms than for
sorry. Okay.
University.
Sorry.
I don't know, business. So, but is there anything that you find that could work, of course, with its adaptations in different environments that you think could be reproduced?
Yeah, absolutely. So 100% for me, it's theme. I am a huge proponent of theme. If you're going to walk into a classroom that's gamified and you're going to say, guys, we're in this medieval land and we're trying to rescue you because you've been captured and blah, 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 and then your classroom lists brick and mortar and desks in a row, the kids can't get into that proper mindset. It's difficult. So I think theme is a massive, massive proponent. Now, sorry, I understand your question better now. So when it comes to that basis of theme, I think that if you can create the environment and sell it to kids and like the whole adage of being kind of that greasy used car salesman, you have to sell this to kids. And once they bite on, you don't have to do anything because they'll run the show. So my kids have decorated the classroom. I've brought some stuff in. They were like, oh my God, this wall's blank here. I've got this perfect thing. And like all of a sudden they just start creating the environment because they start imagining what it could be themselves. So I think theme is huge because it's easy to connect. Kids are so easy to, like I said, watch a movie, read a book, follow someone on social media, and you become immersed in it. So if your theme is immersive, you can get them to do pretty much anything and push them out of their comfort zone.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Scott. The next question is, what's your favorite game?
In what context?
Whichever you choose. I don't know. You mentioned Diablo. It could be Diablo if that's.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, like I just have these memories of a kid of playing this Diablo game with my dad, and it's just one of those things that's always been a favorite of mine. I am obsessive right now because it's just like Diablo, of this new mobile game that came out in August called Last Day on Earth, which is essentially a zombie survival game. And
I love that kind of games. I'm
yeah,
an absolute fan of survival zombie games.
yeah, so this one's awesome. It's really simple. It's mobile. It's very similar to Diablo. You just walk around killing zombies, picking up stuff, and building things. And yeah, and I've been trying. Actually, the cool part about this gamification thing is once you start it and it starts to work, like you just become fully immersed in it. And the incredible part is I have been using things that are in this zombie game that I play to connect to my classroom. So sometimes kids will see me playing the zombie game and they're like, "What are you doing gaming?" And I'm like, "I'm not gaming. I'm doing professional development right now."
I'm studying.
Yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden they're like, "What's this?" I'm like, "See, remember when I was playing that game? That's from the game, right?" And I started to make these connections. So yeah, I'm a big fan of games like that.
That's fantastic. Scott, is there anybody that you would like to have interviewed here in Professor Game?
I was peeking through your website. I think you've already interviewed. Oh my gosh, I'm losing his name. From Gamified UK, Andre.
Andre, he's on the list, but he hasn't been interviewed, so he can be on the list.
Yeah, he's a must. He's just so phenomenal. He helped me with a lot of different things. Super great guy.
Yeah,
Yukai Chu.
Andre is completely awesome, and Yukai as well. Yeah.
Yeah, those guys are just part of their like reading their content, and their blogs and things like that, and some of their talks are what help fuel the way I do my classroom. So yeah, they're definitely, they're the gurus. That's for sure.
Yeah, Yukai was episode 1, and Andre is hopefully near on the list now.
Perfect.
Is there any book that you would like to recommend to our listeners, especially in the context of gamification?
How about mine? My book's great.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that one's okay. The Even Ninja Monkeys Like to Play by Andre is a fantastic book. It's short, it's sweet, it's easy to follow, and it really dives a bit deeper into the gamification without losing the context. So one thing that I found is I bought a whole pile of books about gamification when it started, and to be frank, I'm not going to name drop them, but they were terrible. They were so academic and so deep, and they made no sense. But they were called field guides, and they were called, learning manuals, and that's what fueled me in writing my book. Was what is something that is easy to read that you could pick up and just follow step by step and create your gamified classroom. So I wanted to do a lot of the work for people. So that's where mine came from. The one that really, really helped in the essence was a book by, probably another good interview would be Lee Sheldon. He's one of the pioneers in gamification in the classroom. He taught a game design course, and he thought, well, what better way to teach game design than to have the course be a game itself at the university college level. And he wrote a book called The Multiplayer Classroom, which is phenomenal. That was a great book as well.
Fantastic. And then the next question I would like to ask you is, what do you consider is your superpower when designing gamification for your classroom?
I'm relentless, and that's what people will tell. I will work till 2 a.m, without hesitation. I'm zero fear of failure, completely. Like I said, the whole jail experience, we've tried having black markets and auctions, and there's been so many things that I'll just try if kids want to try it, because we talk about, again, like those buzzwords where you gotta have kids who aren't afraid to fail. And I'm like, well, do you reflect that as a teacher? Well, no, I have to make sure that I'm like, well, then you can't expect kids to be not afraid to fail if you're as rigid as a 2x4 in your approach. So I'm so just go with the flow, fearless. I'm just going to try it, and whatever happens. In the end of the day, we're going to get through the content however we decide to do it. So
I heard an expression recently about that being relentless and the fear, and it's in the end, at some point, and in different ways, everybody gets to feel the fear. But those who are called fearless in a way are those that feel the fear but do it anyway. So I would definitely recognize your capacity to push through that completely.
Perfect.
That's fantastic. So Scott, we're reaching the end of the interview, and I wanted to know if you have any final quick advice for the engagers, especially for those who have never done this in their classroom, who have never used gamification in their classroom. What would you tell them?
I would tell them that education has been the same since its inception. It really has been. All that we've done is we've updated content, and then we have got better technology. So I don't know how many classrooms I've seen or viewed videos on YouTube where they're apparently supposedly incredible people, but they're just throwing iPads at kids and throwing tablets at kids, and they're like, look at how amazing this stuff is. And they're actually not creating that deep connection. The cool part about gamification, honestly, for anyone who's willing to try it, is the level of engagement that you get with kids and the amount of creativity and problem solving that they pull out of stuff is absolutely mind-blowing. Like, I've received things that I would have never thought possible. I could have never even dreamed of creating these type of assignments or content. But the kids, when you give up control of your classroom to kids, and like I said, you're not worried. You're not worried about that failure or that fear consuming you because it's non-traditional. Your classroom will just flourish. And I think that's what's been the incredible thing is, out of the all these teachers that have bought my book or followed my YouTube and tried this and have emailed me, they've said they'll never teach a different way, because the amount of control that they give to the kids, and in turn the amount that is reciprocated back to the teacher is so powerful in their classroom. And they, the collaboration and the teamwork and the creativity and the pushing out of their comfort zone and things like that is just so different than your standard rows. There's a wicked quote by a guy named John Dewey, who was an education critic in the early 1900s. And I thought it was super cool because in 1917, he said, if we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob kids of tomorrow. And he said that in 1917.
Wow.
And when you really think about it, education hasn't changed
since then.
Right, exactly, right? You can walk into any classroom anywhere in the world, and 9.9 times out of 10, you're going to find rows. You're going to find cheesy motivational posters. You're going to find silence, order, regime. And you go to any CEO or any successful person and you say, is this what you want your employees and your innovators to be? And they would say, of course not. So my goal as a teacher, ultimately, for anyone who does gamification, especially anyone who teaches sciences, is most of our scientific discoveries that can be done with just base fact are finished. The big discoveries we have now are this, like, using information in a creative way, in an innovative way. I always like to say, to people, 50 years ago, if I said we were going to develop microscopic nano robots that could swim through your blood, and they would think that you're absolutely insane. But that's real technology that's being developed now because someone wasn't afraid to say that, hey, this is something that I think we can do. And traditional education, in my humble opinion, squashes that. Mm-hmm. It's very much, what does the book say? Write it down on paper. Yeah. Move on.
Memorize.
Exactly, right? I once ran into a student years ago in my career, or a parent, I should say, that was frustrated because where I'm from is from Sudbury, Ontario, and it's known for nickel, mining town. And a question on a test was about that community. They're like, what is Sudbury known for? And the student wrote minerals and got it wrong because the teacher wanted them to write nickel.
Nickel, yeah.
And that's the concept of education, is that what does it look like? It looks exactly like this.
Yeah.
And
it's so a bit sad in many ways.
It is, right? And that's something that I'm a huge pusher of, is to break that, So I'll have so many people that will come up and criticize what I do because at first glance, it doesn't look like learning. Because at first glance, it's not rows, it's not quiet, it's not order. You walk in, you got 2 kids building furniture in one corner, couple people playing in my tabletop game with trivia, a few people in the back, just talking and planning, a couple people drawing or whatever. And people just can't handle the fact that my classroom is so loose and structured.
So different.
Yeah. So,
that's what we've been taught, Scott. So
but that's it, right?
That's what we have to change.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Well, Scott, I would finally like to ask you which are the ways that we can connect with you. You've been mentioning quite a few throughout the interview, but this is a place so everybody can refer to your webpage, Twitter, whatever you want to mention, or all of them.
Yeah, sure. So I have a website where everything is linked. So it's just my name. It's just Mr. Hebert, Hebert. And the key part here is it's .org, not .com. Someone bought .com, and it's super creepy art site. So that is not me. Excuse me. If you go to mrhebert.com, I am .org. I have a YouTube channel called Master Hebes. If you just look that up, just Master and then Heebs. Again, kids name me in the game. That's my game character avatar in the game. So you can find me there. On Twitter and on Instagram, I'm at Mr. Hebert PE. What else do I have? I've got my book. I've got my book that I wrote. Again, it's called Press Start to Begin. It's on Amazon and on my website.
And you have the Facebook group called The Gamification Guy.
That's right. Yeah. My goal is to be a lot more active on those platforms than I have been. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I had some medical things happening in December that kind of took a lot of my time, but if everything is all clear in this coming week, then I'll be back at it, creating more videos and more content and things. There's also a hashtag I use on social media called, on Twitter, I should say, called Game My Class, where the community that I'm building kind of shares ideas there. It's small but growing.
Fantastic.
So yeah, I got all kinds of places.
Thank you very much for taking the time to speaking with us, Scott. And we'll call it game over.
Sounds good to me. Thanks for playing.
Thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. If you enjoyed this interview with Scott Hebert, please give us a 5-star rating and review in iTunes or Stitcher or whichever app you're using to listen to us. Before you move on, would you like to know how Marigo Raftopoulos takes lessons from daily life into her gamification design? Well, then listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!